So I'm going to sit today because we don't have very many in person. So that way I don't have to carry around our microphone here and kind of see everybody. But my name is Cindy Tran. I'm out of the Department of Chemistry. I teach both chemistry and forensic science courses. So you'll see me use some of those examples throughout this presentation, but I want to make this more interactive. So whatever you are teaching, I want you to kind of think of your kinds of courses, and we're gonna have some pause and like apply to your own course, your own assessments, that kind of thing throughout. I am one of the faculty innovators for the university. I'm out of College of STEM, but I hope that what we talk about today is really applicable to everyone. Interestingly, I was talking with some other faculty towards the end of fall, and they were talking about trying to write assessments and getting them the right level and covering all the right material. And I said, well, just align them with your learning objectives. And they kind of gave me a look of like, well, what? What do you mean my learning objectives? So I thought, well, it's time to get back to the basics. let's revisit what learning objectives are, how we can use them, and how we can use them better, perhaps throughout our teaching and instructing at all levels. And if I ever forget to change slides and you're like, I don't think we're on the right slide, please tell me, because I have them on two computers and they're not linked here. So when we talk about learning objectives, every program here has programmatic learning objectives. And if you've ever had to do assessments, you know that we have objectives that we then have to tie learning measures to. But we also have our course objectives, which can be set by the instructor themselves, or they're sometimes set by, I know in our department where we have courses that have multiple sections, they're set by working groups that kind of decide what the course objective should be. But then at the teaching level, typically the instructor has the option of setting kind of module or specific topic objectives. And so we go from very broad program objectives down more narrow to course, down even more narrow to module or topic. And we would talk one more level further about a specific assessment learning objectives. Now, what I love about learning objectives is definitely not writing them, but that they give a really clear goal for students. I like that when my students say, can I have a study guide for this exam? I say, well, go to the module or topic objectives that we've covered. That's your study guide. When they say, what am I supposed to get out of this? I say, go to the course objectives. Those are our goals. And it really can clarify for students and for my own sake, keep me on track of where I've said things are important and making sure that I can align that. Now we call this kind of backward design, where you have your topics and then we're kind of working our way backwards to say, how do we align our course design and assignments to achieve the outcomes we've already said are important. And what I notice as a faculty innovator is I have all these great ideas of innovative things to do in my classroom, and I always have to come back to, does this actually fit with the course design and the course objectives that I have? Because sometimes you get really excited about this new way to do something, and you're like, I've never thought about doing this kind of assignment in my class, and you try to make it work and it actually doesn't fit. But going back to those objectives can help me decide, even at is this the right kind of assignment level of planning? And so I want to kind of bounce some of these things around today. Now, when you go to write learning objectives, there are a handful of different frameworks that can guide the language of those. And we're going to just talk about two of those today, although if you start looking in the literature about writing learning objectives, there's a whole bunch of different frameworks. But the two that we're going to talk about today are Bloom's taxonomy and Fink's taxonomy of significant learning. So before we get too far into this, I want to just pause for a second and say this is going to be interactive. So if you don't have a syllabus or a class in mind that you want to talk about learning objectives for in this session, you might want to go ahead and pull that up here while we're introducing these learning objective taxonomies. Okay, so the first taxonomy I want to introduce today is Bloom's taxonomy. And this is typically described as a triangle where we have, there we go, where we have kind of low level foundational aspects at the bottom and really high level, high order thinking at the top. And one thing that I love about Bloom's is that it typically gives action verbs associated with each kind of order and each kind of level. And so it makes it really clear to me to say when a lot of my learning objectives are just like to define or to list or to memorize or to repeat things, I'm really at low order Bloom's. And there's nothing wrong with a low order Bloom's learning objective, because at some point students need a foundational language for your course, right? In my courses, terminology is important, and using the clear terminology and proper terminology is something I do hold to very high standards. But that's not where I want it to end, right? I want to get to some higher things where they're analyzing, where they're applying, where they're ultimately perhaps creating or designing something new from the information that they've gathered. So having kind of a mix of these low order ones that are your kind of quick answer questions you'd think of on an exam or something, and higher order ones that might be more project based or more, bigger assessments, broader conceptual items. We need to have kind of a balance there. So as an example here, so the examples I'm drawing from today are all from a forensic science class I teach called Trace Evidence Analysis. And this is, and we're going to talk specifically about one aspect of that where they're going to be analyzing fire debris for the presence of some kind of ignitable liquid residue like gasoline. Okay, so this is where my examples kind of come from today. So in thinking about this idea of we want them to be able to take a piece of fire debris, we want them to identify if there's an ignitable liquid present. We also want them to differentiate between what class of ignitable liquid. Is it gasoline? Is it kerosene? Is it diesel? Is it lighter fluid? They're all going to be different chemically. Mm-hmm. And so I've got two different learning objectives here for the same kind of topic that represent different levels of Bloom's. So I do want them to identify that there are different classifications, but I want them to also differentiate between these. And so that differentiation comes a little bit higher order level thinking. So we're going to pause, and I want you to think about or pull up a syllabus. And so we're going to work for this exercise. You can work either on a class level, like a course objective, or on an assignment level. But I want you to think about, where do your learning objectives for your course really fall on Bloom's taxonomy? And how would you rephrase one of them, or would there be ones that you would want to move to a higher level? Would some of them be appropriate to move to a higher level that maybe you haven't thought about before? So I'll give you just a couple minutes to think about it, and you're welcome to, for those on Zoom, you're welcome to post in the chat or unmute and kind of chat with us here. And this person can chat about it as well as you're kind of thinking through those.
So I don't know if you have seen that it also might change depending on the class you have. Like I'm reading the specific objectives of the course right now, and at the beginning, so this is a grammar class, so it's a Spanish grammar class. So it's a 300 level class, so it's grammar and context. But at the beginning I thought, okay, I'm gonna do this and objectives, but like the class I have right now, they're really advanced, I could say. So they know the grammar points, most of the grammar points. Mm-hmm. And I could tell last week that they were expecting more from me than just relying on the lower levels. Because for me, it's just, I'm asking them to repeat or to fill in the blanks of something, but maybe they are already in the stage where they can apply things in like context, not just do mechanical activities of, put the conjunction that belongs here, or some of them do struggle with that, but I do think they are expecting more to apply. But I was afraid to do the first weeks, because it's just week 3, right? So I'm like, but I am really, because the course objectives are there, but I can see that the objectives are also going to the higher level, actually, because
Yeah.
it says, develop linguistic abilities in the use of formal and informal Spanish, right? So
Yeah,
it's not just knowing the grammar, it's actually also practicing it and identifying situations, formal versus informal. So that's why I came to this, because I
Yeah.
was thinking this class is the first time I'm teaching it. So
Yeah.
it is a learning curve for me.
right.
But I am seeing that the class, I mean, I have had those students in other classes, and I know they know the grammar, and I know they're fluent.
Mhm.
So I definitely need to give them a base, right? But there's
Right.
nothing wrong with per modules, for example. Like it gives me trouble to think about objectives per like models sometimes. I do per topics, I would say.
Yeah.
But I'm afraid of going to like higher levels. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah.
But I definitely can.
I will say the higher levels tend to require more from an instructor perspective too. Like
Yeah.
it requires more of me to come up with a really good assessment
Project, right,
or
yeah.
a project
Yeah.
or those kinds of questions that bring them up to a higher level without, giving them the answer. And that can be a real challenge as an instructor. But when your students are ready for that and you do want to get them there,
Yeah.
then
yeah.
that's kind of a nice bridge. I do a lot of group work in my classes, and in some of them I have a lot of handouts, and some of them are very low level
Mhm.
blooms, practicing things,
Yeah.
skills and things. And I always try to include at the end, because I'll have multiple groups around the room, and inevitably you get that one group that just like finishes real fast. 'Cause
Right.
they've got the foundation, they're like boom, 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 done. Now what? And I always try to have like challenge questions at the end that get them to the higher order of blooms. And it's not necessarily the areas I'm going to test on.
Mhm.
It's not how I'm going to test, but it gives them something to practice with that's less formal than something I have to grade as well. So that can be a nice balance sometimes for,
So in the same
For
class, you
balance.
actually do go like from the low to the high.
yeah, so I'll include some of both. Now, this is not my first iteration teaching the course that I've
Right,
done that.
Exactly, yeah.
It's usually by third or fourth iteration. I'm like, okay, now I know what my higher order questions are.
Right.
But if you know those are already needed,
Mhm.
you can start building some of those in. Building those kind of, I always call them challenge questions that make them go a little bit higher
Mhm.
into or a little more in depth.
Yeah, for sure.
Online participants, any thoughts or questions about your own learning objectives you'd like to share out?
I have a quick question. So I'm creating a new course that's
Mhm.
going to be taught for the first time spring B of this semester.
Okay.
And it has both undergrads and graduate students in it. So is it the recommendation, would you guys say, for the graduate students, for their additional learning outcomes, to make those higher on the taxonomy, or is that, or just more learning objectives? What is the thinking on that?
I would say for graduate students, getting to a higher order of blooms would be appropriate. I have not taught cross-listed undergrad grad classes myself, but I have taught undergrads and I have taught grads, like a lower level version of the course and an advanced version. And the advanced version, I taught, I had much higher expectations. Like we were going to get through those low level terminology and basic foundations very quickly, and then dive into more journal articles and literature and applying it, as opposed to just reading a paper and saying, they did this and they got these results, and here's how it connects the two. Going into, well, why did they choose this methodology? And why did they choose this kind of, for us, it would be like a statistical analysis. Why did they pick this way to analyze their data? What is it telling them that this other method that we've looked at couldn't tell them? Or kind of making them go to a higher level of analysis than what I would expect my undergraduates to really be able to achieve. And so when you're cross-listing that, I've often seen that come out from some of the cross-listed courses in our department, as the graduate students have to do an extra like research presentation or kind of a research paper or something that makes them take the foundational knowledge that everyone else is kind of getting and go one step higher to do some kind of evaluation or creation. But I think it would be perhaps field dependent what that would look like for your course. But I would definitely want my graduate students to be higher on blooms than what I would expect from undergraduates.
So it's not necessarily about creating more work. It's about like taking a deeper dive into the hows and whys behind. I guess it's kind of like applying the knowledge and that they've learned thus far, like a step beyond what undergrads are doing.
Yeah, and it could be through a separate assignment, or it could be through additional depth to the assignment that you expect. But always coming back to making it clear that for the graduate students, there are these additional layers of depth that they're going to have to hit for their full credit.
Thanks.
There's nothing worse than being the grad student and being like, well, I hit the rubric, and you're like, yeah, but grad students actually needed to go further in depth. And you're like, well, let's tell them that. Yeah.
I would remove them on one of them to the higher level. Yeah, that's kind of like the question I have to
Yeah.
myself. Definitely reprogramming the activities, like rethinking the
Yeah.
actual activities, like even the homework I assign, because we use a platform on VHL, and I'm like, I probably should give them like more challenging questions, or even like
Mhm.
more like essay questions, or I don't know. I think that's what I might do in this next week, because so far the homework only looks at memorizing or
Mhm.
repeating, or maybe understanding but not yet applying. So
Yeah.
I just rethink that the assessment part really.
And I find a lot of, at least in the chemistry field, a lot of the homework learning systems tend to stay at the first couple of these, because those are things that can auto grade, right? Blackboard can auto grade multiple choice questions, can auto grade true or false, and those tend to be very much remember, understand, and some apply. Here's a sketch, tell me, which one of these answers matches or describes what's going on here. But getting to those higher order blooms often requires more from the instructor, not only in the design, but in the grading aspect as well. And it often can't be auto-graded well, which lends itself to higher order courses and to, but also it can be a real-time thing. So when we talk about aligning assessments here in a little bit, we'll dive into that, or add that as a caveat. Okay, so the second approach to learning objectives that I want to give is quite different. Okay, this is Fink's taxonomy of significant learning, and it's not just knowledge-based, although foundational knowledge is a wedge here. And you notice it's a circle with wedges as opposed to a foundation, and then we're building upward. And so what Fink postulated here was that there is more to a person than just developing skills. And so this one includes areas that are much less quantifiable, but equally important in educating. I'm an educating scientist because that's my field, but educating all students really. It includes those kind of, those soft skills or learning-based skills, or human interaction skills that we do still want students to come out with. And I will admit that most of my learning objectives, particularly when I look at programmatic and course and assessment ones, they're not specifically written about developing people skills.
Yeah.
Though that is actually a huge piece of how I've built my class, is to develop some of these people skills of interaction with each other, of having good discussion where you can disagree and then find the correct answer or come to a conclusion still. And so I like this framework in that it does include some of these other areas that are important, but may not be formalized into our learning objectives that we have. Now, some areas of the university do much better with these kinds of person-based skills as opposed to just the knowledge-based ones. But in the sciences, we tend to be very knowledge-focused. and leave the people out, but we really do actually care that that is included. So as we're thinking about our skills, we might also then include these people-based ones. So here's my example, my foundational knowledge is I want them to differentiate between ignitable liquid classifications. But in thinking about how I want them to do this, perhaps in a laboratory setting, as a forensic scientist, they're going to have to work with other people as well. They don't get to work in a vacuum. So I want them to also learn, at the same time they're learning these knowledge things, to learn to effectively work with others to solve problems. And that can include more of these wedges. So in thinking about this kind of Fink's taxonomy, I want to kind of pause and practice. Are there any learning objectives that you have for your program, course, or assignment? And these don't have to be formalized in writing, right? My syllabi don't always include that I want people to work collaboratively, although I've been adding that to more and more these days. But where are those learning objectives present in your course that are more human focused rather than information or skill? And should they become more formal learning objectives?
So far, I would say written, I see. And this definitely something I hadn't thought before, that I always want them to work in groups or even in pairs. And most of their projects are usually in groups, but yes, definitely something I need them to work on, because some students don't want to work with anybody. And they actually ask, like, can I do this on my own? But like the actual project requires like a lot of work in itself. So I'm like, I do think I should add that in writing, honestly, because after COVID, you know how students changed, right? Like I think I used to be in another home, and most of them did high school on Zoom for at least the 2 years, the last 2 years. So they're not used to working in groups, or maybe they did, but not seeing the people face to face. So now they come here and they're like, I don't know, but it is definitely a soft skill, or more human, being able to work with groups. And I have, proved in my experience that yes, you do need to have people skills at a certain point, because you work with colleagues, you work with students, you work with in committees, and it's just so many different opinions, so many different leadership styles or whatever. So yeah, like I was seeing my objectives, and I don't think I see any. I think the only one that I see is it says something like ability to communicate effectively in open-ended situation with others. So I do think this is more towards that, but I think it's the only one I see. So maybe in my own objectives in my mind, I do have those, but I definitely want to rethink how I put them in a way that they know that I'm also expecting that from them. Because I do tell them the first day of class, like, what am I expecting from you? So I said teamwork, but I don't have that in writing anywhere. So they just like, forget it, or they conveniently forget it, so yeah. Yeah, we're just in the first question, right? Or are we both?
Both, yeah, they're kind of intertwined there, yeah.
I don't think you can include them in writing in a syllabus for sure, or in models.
Yeah,
definitely.
Yeah.
I think this is really interesting. I thinking about it, and I work for the Training Resource Center, and so we do online training for social workers and foster parents and early childhood educators, and thinking about how the skills that they might need, some of those soft skills, and how they aren't necessarily intertwined into our training, but how valuable they are. And then from an instructional design perspective, for online courses, you really want to make sure that you are hitting some of those soft skills in your online courses to get to that student, so that deeper level learning is occurring.
Yeah, I found I do a lot. Like I said, I do a lot of discussion in my courses, a lot of active learning. And when I didn't have as a learning objective for the course that I purposefully want them to be able to communicate their thoughts and ideas to each other in real time without the luxury of being able to like sit with the material for a long time. I want them to be like, here's some information, do something with it, communicate with it. which is a different skill than saying you can go back and research and read and do all your things and then write this beautiful discussion board. It's a different set of skills, right? And when I started telling people, you know, people walk into my office and hand me a scenario and ask my opinion of it. And they did that when I was at a national lab, and I'm like, I have to be able to think on my feet. And so I actually added that as a learning objective in one of my courses. I'm like, I want you to think on your feet, because that is such an important skill as well. And it opened up the door to have the conversation of like, well, what does your future job look like, and what are you going to need, and how is this aligned? I mean, it's not just to make your life more difficult now, which is often what students think.
Yeah, but it's just not knowledge, right? Like,
Right,
I mean,
right.
they can, of course.
I
do all
can't
of-
test you over that
Right.
per se.
But like getting a job and then working on a difficult environment or whatever, those require human skills or more like soft skills.
Right.
And we know there's not a class that teaches them, so maybe
No.
we can incorporate those in our own.
Mhm.
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 Because I had the pointer. I think it's because I didn't the pointer.
So I want to show this. This is just an example at each level. So in the forensic science program, we have both knowledge-based and person-focused ones. Although I will say the person-focused is a little bit more of a stretch, but it's just talking about having the attitudes and ethics and values of a forensic scientist. And then at the course objective, this is for my trace evidence course. We have data, that's interpretation, that's knowledge focused, but then I also have, I want you to work effectively with other students. And then at perhaps just the module or topic levels, we're talking about the fire debris analysis, we've got a knowledge one, and then we've got them to collaborate together to analyze their samples. So we can have these both knowledge focused and person focused at a variety of levels here. So I think we've done this to some extent, but I want to pause and open up for any other comments or questions before we kind of move out of kind of course level and into a bit more on assessment level of things. Were there any other thoughts that you wanted to add about communicating objectives to your students or writing clear ones at these kind of pragmatic course or modular levels?
I think the other courses I have taught have this more clear. Maybe they have been revised recently, but this one I'm teaching for the first time, I think requires a little bit of work and revision because I don't see some like clear learning objectives. Even like I have used Blooms for a while, also a little bit of Fink, but the way they are like written, I don't think they are following any specific maybe taxonomy or framework, but that makes them hard to, I don't know, understand like what exactly do I want from my students. So I think this is a job I kind of want to do, kind of like revisit this objectives of this class. But I do communicate my students my own objectives at the beginning of each class. Like this is what we're gonna do, and this is what I want to accomplish. Maybe one or two. Verbally, that's what I do. And I started doing this recently because I remember maybe a year ago or something, students were like, but why are we doing this? Like literally I had a student say, but why are we doing this? What's the point? I think he used, what's the point?
Yeah.
I don't think he meant to be rude or anything, but he had a point.
Right,
The fact that, yes, that's true. Why am I making you do this role play?
Right.
About, this situation in Spanish, but like, it's because I wanted them to practice a specific vocab.
Right.
But they don't know that, of course. They
Yeah.
don't know. I mean, they're just learning. I do know that, but
Yeah.
I can't expect them to know too. So I started just putting like their objectives at the beginning, like in my slides, and I think now I'm gonna move into like actually putting them in like the calendar or not just the modules if it's an online course, because I have only taught one online course this semester. But yes, not just doing that verbally, but also then for them to see it in writing. Yeah. And I think I would like to add more like person focus too. Because so far I only have like knowledge. So basically, yeah, I only have knowledge, objectives, but no knowledge focus, yeah. Mhm. That's why she had the chat, I think. For that. Oh, no, I think it was just the same. Yeah, Kathy. But you can leave it like that, that way. If anyone says it. I'm rather like speaking up, you know. Like
For
people on
those,
Zoom.
for those that
Yeah.
may not have grabbed it earlier, there's a handout and the handout just has Bloom's and Fink's taxonomy on it. So that way you can have a quick reference to them.
Cindy, I posted the link and the handouts in the chat again for
Okay.
anyone that signed on.
Oh, that's why the new chat was. Yeah.
Okay, so in our brief summary of these kind of program course topic or module goals, these are again broader, more inclusive at the program level, and we're getting more narrow and focused as we go down to the topic level. We've got cognitive or knowledge-based goals with Bloom's, and then we've also got kind of person goals with Fink's taxonomy of significant learning. So kind of thinking then through down to an assignment, which is where we kind of get in the weeds as instructors. And I don't know if anyone else has the experience of it, but kind of walking into a course and having this brilliant idea of a great project that everyone should do, and it's worth so much of the grade. And then you sit back and go, did it really actually address my learning objectives? And did it do it well? Or was it just kind of a more or less a time sink for students and myself in grading things? What is the purpose of this, and where are we heading? So some tools for thought here when you're thinking about an assessment. The first thing that I always come back to is, what are the learning objectives I want this assessment to address? Is it one, or is it lots of learning objectives? Are there other non-quantifiable skills that I want to include other than just the knowledge base? So do I need to have this be a video response so they get that oral communication? Do I need them to be writing something longer? Or is generally this assessment, does it need to be very knowledge-based, especially at the recall, remember, apply levels? Because sometimes that has a place too, you know. For a quick response multiple choice quiz at the start of class to review what we covered last class. Where am I at here, and what are my actual goals for this? And then couple that with tools, techniques, or course design aspects that are actually available to me. I'm finding that there is a lot of innovation in how we teach, and especially kind of coming out of COVID, where we've done more hybrid and we've used more electronic tools, and we're integrating technology into the classroom and into our courses. Sometimes we get lost in the tool as opposed to the assessment. And so factoring in that kind of, am I going to answer 18 emails about how to access the tool versus I'd rather have 18 emails about let me discuss this information further or get to that higher order Bloom's. Where are we at in the complexity? Are the directions of the assessment so complex that they're getting lost in the steps of the assessment versus what I want them to actually achieve? And one new thing that's come up in the last year is, how susceptible is what I'm asking the students to do? How susceptible is it to artificial intelligence? Can they plug it into ChatGPT and come up with an answer and copy and paste it and they're done? Because I'll admit, many of my short answer questions on previous homeworks, they could. And then I'd just be grading ChatGPT's response over and over and over. So, and then how do I kind of turn that on its head a little bit? And that's a whole other TLI session on how to.
Oh, yeah.
There's a whole series on AI, so we don't need to go into that today. But two of the things I will mention that I've done is I have actually taken my short answer, plugged it into ChatGPT and said, I took this short answer. I plugged it into short answer question. I plugged into ChatGPT. Here's where it came out. And I would grade this as, about a C level. What were they missing?
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
And so then they have to kind of tease out, okay, where is the information correct? Where is it not correct? Where is it not quite correct? Where is it not detailed enough? Why doesn't it fully answer the question? Or we use a lot of standards in the field. And so instead of saying, here's the standard, discuss why this is important, I say, go find this standard. And in this section of the standard document, now tell me why that section is important. And ChatGPT doesn't know what the section says. They can't find it. So those are two of my like quick and easy fixes to get around some of that. But again, what am I trying to achieve in these questions? Where am I at on the assessment level and in Bloom's? And what do I want to do? And sometimes incorporating those non-quantifiable skills by saying, okay, now you've got to make a video that has you discussing the topic. Well, they're still going to have to come up with their thoughts about it. But then at least if they're saying it out loud, then I know they haven't just copied and pasted. There's some level of cognitive engagement. On the flip side of all that is I also have to think about time for grading and class size scale, right? What I can do with my class of 14 is different than what I can do with my class of 60.
Yes.
I can't do video discussion boards with a class of 60. I tried it one time because I thought it was a brilliant idea and it was horrible. So, learning as you go of where this should be can be a challenge. But I want to also kind of challenge the assumption that the statement or the idea that I need to write a homework set because the class should have homework. Or every class I took has a quiz. I should write quizzes. And I want to challenge that if that's something that you're working with. Although you're here, so it's probably not. But that can be a mindset that we get stuck in, that all my assessments have to look the same.
Like there's a need to be a final exam, like a final rating exam,
Right.
because it's illegal not to have one, right? Because that's what we think. But what about a project or something different?
Right, a presentation, a project, or even having students gather and having conversations where they're kind of where you're kind of monitoring the conversations between them.
Mhm. Yeah.
But Holly, thanks for joining us for what you can. We appreciate your coming in. So here's some examples of an assessment here that I used for this particular module that we've been talking about. I know it's kind of covered up by boxes there at the bottom, so I'll just read it. They would work in pairs. That gives us the collaboration. And they're going to classify several ignitable liquids and then identify a possible source for an ignitable liquid that's already on a piece of evidence. So they're looking at differentiating between these and then applying it to this new piece of evidence to have to align it. And so that's a kind of very a practical analysis where they're having to do that. I could also pair this with a written report. So then there's something kind of formal for me to grade. They like the written things so that they can get official feedback. Because sometimes students don't think the other kinds of feedback that we might give on how they're conversing with each other or their participation with each other is valid. So we can do a little pause and practice here. Although I want to be respectful of everyone's time, we've got about 10 more minutes left. It's kind of 15-minute session. I think we might have said 45. So I'm going to set this here for just a minute, but we're not going to pause and discuss, but kind of food for thought as you're looking at your courses.
I think I do need like more time to actually sit.
Yeah.
See that.
And the next activity here I have is actually about connecting them all. So, I think this was introduced to me in the PD2 class that they run for Blackboard online teaching, best practices. But what it's akin to your kind of student teaching lesson plan, where you've got your learning objective, where are you assessing it? What does that prompt look like? Where do you have blooms? Where do you have Finks? And the answer could be, well, I'm not doing blooms on this assessment. It's really a Finks, or vice versa. But this can be a really good way to kind of visibly see it. And it is time consuming to put together. So I don't necessarily say you should do it for every assessment and every learning objective and everything in your course. But it can be a really good kind of pause and check mental exercise here of how am I aligning these things, and making sure as well that all of your learning objectives are tied to some kind of assessment, at least at the programmatic level. I do some course reviews for people, and I'll say, oh, in your whole of your course, you have this, one of your 8 learning objectives you never actually address in anything that you're showing student grades for, or at the end kind of calculation. So let's make sure that your learning objectives are actually what you're assessing on, and not just the other things that you found along the way to assess on. So this can be a really good way to do that. And it's one of the ways in which I kind of organize things.
It would be.
Go ahead. I just want to tell you how much I love this table. I'm a visual person, which seeing this is like, oh yes, this is how I make it happen. So thank you for this specifically. It's fantastic.
Yeah, and I hope, as Cassie sends out the slides, I hope you'll come back to this section as you have time.
We have access to them? Because I'm not in the Zoom, but I'm not.
She was gonna send out an email with the handout and the
perfect.
slides as well.
Yeah, because like for me, at least for the final projects, it's always it would be good to have something like this, because I have it like in writing, but not like this. So I think this is really helpful. Not because I mean, like you say, I cannot do it for every quiz or
Right.
but for a final project or for the final assessment, yes, I do think I need that.
And I will say I've also used this kind of idea for my like final exam,
Yes.
where I had written a final exam, and then I was like, did I actually hit my learning objectives for the class? And I pulled all of my topic learning objectives and put them on one page. Okay, it was like 5 pages, but and then I went through my questions, and I was like, okay, this question maps to this spot on my learning objectives, and this one maps to this learning objective, and that one maps. Oh, and this one doesn't map to a single learning objective in my course. Why am I asking that question worth 5 points out of the 150? Like, that's not fair to the students. I haven't told them it was important. So sometimes just pausing and going, what were my learning objectives? What am I actually asking them to do? And how are they aligning is a really useful activity. Another thing that I've really liked to see is also from this table, then you kind of know what Bloom's level. And if you're all kind of lower level, which is where I tend to get stuck personally in my courses, then I have to take a step back and say, okay, how do I get it to higher? So, and you can come back and read this because there's a lot of words on this, but this shows kind of different ways in which we could get, for the same topic, for the same learning objective, different ideas that hit different orders of blooms. And so my assessment type can change based on what level of blooms I really want to hit in this portion of the class. Okay. And so obviously this is specific language to my field, but I want to give you an idea that different kinds of assessments can lead to different orders of blooms. And so you might, if you're finding that all of your assessments are one order of blooms, you might need to adjust them up or down for some of your things. And don't feel that you need to hit every level of blooms for a topic, or use a ton of different assignments. Kind of balance that out for your class. Because again, the more kinds of assignments you have, the more student questions about, well, what assignment is this? What am I supposed to do? Start coming up, and the actual goal of the learning objective gets lost. You can also do the same thing with Fink's wedge and kind of get different wedges involved. So I've got a couple of examples there as well.
It is great. That is great.
Okay, so again, these are great resources, and they really do take more time than what we have today to think through. So you can pause and practice and food for thought, revisit these as you go through your own learning objectives and thinking about courses. And I will say, this is a lot of what I do in like summer and winter terms, is I call it my 20,000 feet overview of my class, of kind of getting the ideas out
Yeah.
before I go down into the weeds of what my assessments look like. So in kind of final summary, we want to align assessments with the learning objectives so that you're not losing learning objectives where they have no assessment throughout your course, especially if they're a course level assessment learning objective. But you also want to align the assessments that they are actually testing learning objectives. So it's kind of a both and, all the learning objectives covered and the assessments are really focused in on those. Choosing assessments that include additional significant learning areas, such as those human areas, can be very important. And so you may have to explore assessment types beyond a traditional homework quiz written exam question as evidence of learning. And there are more TLIs and a lot of recorded sessions from the last couple of years on innovative ideas with that. And if you ever want to bounce ideas around for your course, I love doing that. That's why I'm a faculty innovator. I love working with people on their courses in my own college and outside of it. So if you have questions or thoughts or want to toss around some more ideas, feel free to reach out. If there are any lingering questions, I'm happy to stick around and answer them. And if not, enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you so much for being here in person and on Zoom.
Thanks for sharing this information. It's been really, really helpful for me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was really helpful. Yeah, I'm looking forward to get the, the slides and get to work on that. Cause I was also thinking about this summer, working on more deep things. Cause right now, like the time is just, but at least in this class, cause this is the only one that I'm teaching for the first time, I'm gonna, because the others I already have them lined up, but yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So it's always a matter of balancing time and energy, and it's hard to do when you're in semester. but
Oh,
it's
yeah,
fine.
it's just so chaotic.
Summer and you know, people say, oh, you don't have to work summer and winter, and you're like, but I actually do if I want to be planned and ready and building. And if I want to write my course once and never touch it again, then sure, I'm day one ready every time. But
That's right.
that doesn't always meet the needs of students as they shift and change. So
Yeah, like I'm just finishing my second year, so a lot of the courses I'm only teaching for the first time, so
Yeah.
like kind of want to sit and because some of those I'm already teaching 2 or 3 times, like the 102s or the general Spanish classes, but even those I'm already changing things because I'm realizing, no, this doesn't really align with what I want to do, and it doesn't work with students. Like I have seen that it doesn't work for them, so. But yeah, this was really helpful. Thank you.
yeah. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. Was I supposed to sign anywhere, like check in? I don't know with Cassie.
Yeah, check in with Cassie.
I'm gonna ask her.
Yeah.
So I usually come in soon, so I know that whenever you click on it, you're like checked. in.
Right. I'm not sure.
Yeah, I think I had to show her a QR code, so I'm gonna ask her. I'll go have lunch now.
Cassie, I'm gonna go ahead and end the meeting.
They said all.